Login accepted.
This on? Mic on? Yep. All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. A couple little technical delays as we get things set up, but thank you for having me. I just wanted to thank the Swift Club and everyone for inviting me out, and really honored to be speaking again this year. So I'm going to be here to talk to you guys about IT and OT cybersecurity and what my company does to protect critical infrastructure. And we're going to get into the difference between IT and OT and some of the components there. And then a little bit about myself. My name is Mike Tyner. I'm an information systems manager at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I have kind of been around for a little while now. I started working for the city of Los Angeles in 2005, and this was prior to cybersecurity even kind of being a thing. Many organizations didn't have much in terms of cybersecurity, let alone entire groups of cybersecurity professionals. And so when I started with the city, I started out a couple years out of college, and I started as a systems analyst working on the help desk. Basically just answering phone calls, resetting passwords, fixing computers. I found that working on the help desk was actually a really great learning experience because you learn a lot about the business itself, about the organization you're working for, because you get to learn about the users, about the different locations, the facilities, software, applications, everything that's running in this organization. You get to learn a lot about it because you're fixing it all. So I got a lot of experience just working on the help desk. Thought that was really great. After that, I spent a couple years, about 7 years, working in the server infrastructure group. Another phenomenal experience because there I started learning about how a large enterprise actually runs. I was working in the data center, installing operating systems, managing terabytes up to a petabyte of storage, fixing things as well. And, that was another really good experience. And it continued to allow me to learn about IT, learn about businesses, learn about large enterprises. I always had this curiosity, though. I always had this itch that I needed to scratch, and that was about cybersecurity. And as Luis was talking about, I had a mentor, and I had a guy that I was always bouncing questions off, and he was kind of in charge of the cybersecurity group at the Department of Water and Power. And I would always ask him questions. I would always say, "Hey, how did this happen? How did Target get hacked? How did Home Depot get? Why did this happen?" So we were always just chatting, and so we were talking, and eventually a position opened up in his cybersecurity group, and so I applied for it and got the job. And so now I've been working in cybersecurity for about 11 years, and it's been awesome. I love it because it's very dynamic. There's always things to learn. There's things that are changing every day. There's new things to deal with, whether it's someone trying to attack you or a vulnerability that's out in the wild, lots of things like that. So I started out as just a regular SOC analyst, level 1 guy, and our team was really small at the time. And so I was monitoring our SIM. I was looking at the events coming in, responding to alerts. And it was myself and one other person kind of just going through it, getting the program built, essentially. And then as the program continued to build, I became the supervisor over our SOC. We rolled out and became a 24/7 operation. So we had more staff, more people, and I was managing the group that was eyes on glass 24/7. And running a 24/7 shop is a lot of work. It's a lot of moving parts, scheduling, coordinating, making sure that you have staff there 24/7. It's a pretty big challenge, but it's also really fun because you can build it the way you want it to be done. And now I'm currently a manager over cybersecurity operations. And what that means is I'm doing more things on the operational side of cybersecurity. So not only am I managing the SOC still, I'm also managing vulnerability management, vulnerability scanning, trying to get all the things patched so they don't get compromised. And I manage cybersecurity infrastructure. So all of the tools and technology that we utilize on the cybersecurity side, whether it's our EDR tools, endpoint management, asset management, things along those lines, those all kind of fall under my purview as well. So, and the program continues to grow. We continue to evolve and learn and make changes. And so it's been a really good journey, and we're certainly not anywhere close to being done yet. So as I started out, I was going to talk to you about IT and OT. So I wanted to talk a little bit about operational technology because my company deals with power and water. Both of those are essentially air-gapped environments, and they use a lot of specialized equipment to operate the different sensors and switches and valves and actuators and stuff like that within the operating technology environment, the OT environment. So OT, it's basically technology used to monitor and control physical processes and devices in industrial environments. It's composed of things like PLCs, HMIs, and valves. So the PLC monitors inputs, executes program logic, controls outputs, and automates processes. It's basically connected to a valve and the valve is the thing that does the actual thing. It opens, it closes, allows water to flow, it shuts water off, it allows power to come in, turns power off, things like that. Then you have the HMI that is a user-friendly dashboard allowing operators to interact with and control the industrial system. So the HMI connects to the PLC, and the PLC connects to the valve, and this is how we operate within an air-gapped environment. This is very specialized equipment, and it's also, it can also be very old equipment too. Sometimes PLCs are 10 or 15 years old, the valves are old. There's a lot of challenges within this environment. Okay, so the way that OT environments typically work is called the Purdue model. So the Purdue model, as you can see, kind of breaks down how the different devices connect in. So if you look over here on the top level, you have the internet or your intranet, and this is the very top level. This is where the internet is coming into your organization. It's connecting in. You have things like your corporate websites and stuff like that that's touching the outward internet. The next level down is going to be separated by a firewall, and you're going to have your typical IT environment. This is going to be your printers, your workstations, your laptops, desktops, your servers that are running finance and typical IT stuff, everything like that. Now, between the internet and the workstations and the printers in the IT environment, there's a called the DMZ, and that basically separates it out and prevents someone from just coming in straight from the internet into your environment. Then as you go down another level, you're going to have another firewall in between the IT environment and then the historian and the app server level. Now, the historian and the app server, these are devices that talk to OT, but they don't necessarily have control. They're not actually doing things, modifying sensors, stuff like that, but they're getting information and then sending it out. And then as you go down the additional next level, you have things like another historian, you've got engineering workstations, and you have HMIs. So here you have a networking device and a firewall, and you're controlling the access. Basically, at this level right here, that's what they call an air gap. Typically, a true air-gapped environment is really just a really strict firewall. It's firewall controls. There's not an actual physical air-gapped environment in most places that have air-gapped environments. So a little behind the scenes on that one. And then as you continue to move down the Purdue model, then you have your PLCs, your RTUs, your actuators, your sensors, the things that are actually doing the controls. And that's separated by like a switch or maybe even a firewall as well. But typically it's just direct connections from like the HMI to the PLC to the. So basically, how do you protect this? This is using multiple firewalls, obviously. You're going to want to have the firewalls in between each layer because from the very top, you have the attacker presence, and it's really a large attacker presence at the very top levels. As it gets lower and lower, it's harder for the attacker to burrow into those lower levels. So you really want to protect the sensors, actuators, the PLCs, because if an attacker gets into that level, it's going to be catastrophic. There's going to be physical consequences. So you want to have multiple firewalls and control that access. very strict access controls. Know who's going to access into what environment and what who's getting through those firewalls. And then protect what you can with what's available. What do I mean by that? So basically, when you get down to like the HMI level, you may be running an operating system that's really old. Some of these HMIs might be running Windows 7, Windows XP. You know, it's true. It's really old stuff because the HMI needs to talk to the PLC. Now, the PLC also has very old operating systems and very old software. And so if you upgrade the HMI to the most current version, the PLC isn't going to talk. And so it's going to break the whole chain. So protect what you can with what's available. You might have to run older antivirus on the HMIs or no antivirus at all. That's where the access controls are really important. That's where you need to have really strict logging, and you want to log everything. You want to know who's getting into those environments. You want to know what's talking to what and when it's talking and when it's supposed to be talking as well. So that's where you want to have a SIM within this OT environment, basically at the 4th level. So it's collecting logs from the HMIs, the workstations, firewalls, and then alerting you to anything anomalous. So that's the basic Purdue model for OT environments. So why is this important? I always feel like it's pretty important to understand what's happened historically so that we can try to protect things that are going to happen in the future. So I like to always do a little bit of a use case, especially with people that I hire, to go back and look at attacks from the past, because what is old sometimes becomes new again. So one of the most interesting ones for me personally was one of the oldest attacks. It was actually called Stuxnet. And I know most of you guys are in college right now, so a little extra homework and reading is never really wanted. But once you are done with college, or maybe you have some time in the summer, there's a great book about Stuxnet. It's called Countdown to Zero. And it goes into a very, very detailed deep dive on the technical aspects of how malware was written to infiltrate an Iranian nuclear facility. It's a phenomenal book. It's a great read, not too long either. But basically, what happened is there's a nation state or 2 nation states that designed malware, and this ended up being about 500,000 lines of code that were designed specifically to attack this Iranian nuclear facility. So what it did is it got onto a workstation of a contractor, and then once the contractor got into the nuclear facility, it then became a worm, and it burrowed its way into the OT environment. And Stuxnet was designed to specifically attack the software that was running the centrifuges that was creating the nuclear material to make nuclear bombs. And these centrifuges were designed to operate at 1200 RPM specifically. And so what the malware did is once it got onto the engineering workstation, it told the software to spin the centrifuges at 1500 RPM for about 2 minutes. And then it would spin it down at 50 RPM. And then it would return it back to normal. And all the meanwhile, on the HMI, everything was looking green and good. So basically, the operators were looking at it saying, everything looks good. But then on the back end, things were breaking because the centrifuges were spinning out of their range. So, and this happened a lot. It ended up damaging a majority of their centrifuges, and they weren't able to actually create the nuclear material to make a nuclear bomb. So highly sophisticated. There's some counterintelligence stuff going on in there. It's really cool book and really cool breakdown of how malware can get into OT environments. So according to so more relevant to my company, because we deal with power, Ukraine's power grid was attacked in 2015 and 2016 by some malware called Black Energy 2. And so what this did is it actually got into the IT environment of a Ukrainian power company, and then they were able to move laterally onto an engineering workstation. So when they got onto the engineering workstation, this was the kind of interesting part, is and Wired actually did a really good write-up on Black Energy and this Ukrainian power grid attack. But when they got onto the engineering workstation, there's actually a video of the mouse moving on the engineering workstation screen, and the operator's looking at his screen, and he looks over to his buddy, and he's like, hey, is IT doing something on my computer right now? And the guy's like, I don't know. So, but they never followed through with IT. They didn't check in and say, hey, are you guys working on our computers? And typically IT isn't going to work on an engineering operating computer. But then what happened is the attackers got onto their computer and then they started flipping switches. And they caused a power outage in Ukraine of about 250 or 300,000 people. And when they did cause that power outage, not only did they flip the switches, but then they ran kill disk and wiped out the computers so that the operators could not go and turn the power back on. They actually had to send someone physically into the field to flip those switches and get power back on. And then once the war kicked off, it happened again in 2022. So they didn't learn a lot of lessons on that one, but they learned some. But like I said, what's old is new again. And so there's always the evolution, and you got to learn from past mistakes. Another interesting one is Triton malware. Got a lot of information about this one, but this is another attack where software was designed specifically to get into a petrochemical plant in Saudi Arabia. And this malware was designed to attack the safety engineering, the safety instrument and security software. Basically similar to Stuxnet. It was a software designed to say that everything is running the way it should be running, or if there's a problem. Well, when this malware got on there, it was showing everything was running accordingly, but it wasn't. And it was causing some problems on the back end. Moving on, Colonial Pipeline. This was actually a ransomware attack that hit a company on the East Coast, and they deliver gas to basically the entire East Coast. Well, the ransomware got into the IT environment and encrypted a lot of their critical systems. It didn't get into the OT environment, but the problem was Colonial, when they got attacked, they did not know how deep the attackers got. So they actually did separate IT from OT. They essentially just pulled the plug on that firewall and said, now we're an island, OT is completely separate than IT. But however, when they did that, they lost control and they couldn't deliver power, or they couldn't deliver gas the way they normally would. So that was a big problem for them. They paid the ransom, ended up getting their data decrypted, and then they worked with the FBI and were able to get some of their money back, actually. I think they paid about $5 million in Bitcoin, and they recovered about, I think, $3.5 million, somewhere along there. SolarWinds, the SolarWinds attack in 2020. This was a really interesting one because it opened up kind of a new attack vector for threat actors where you don't have to just attack one single entity. You can attack thousands all at the exact same time. SolarWinds is a company that monitors and manages network. They look at your network, it's software that runs, and it tells you if your network's good, if there's problems, things along those lines. And what the attacker did is they actually hacked into SolarWinds company and were able to deploy malware into the development process of the software itself. So when they did that, they got their malware onto the software. And then when the software was pushed out to all the companies, essentially the companies were installing this malware onto their computers and onto their systems without even knowing it. And SolarWinds didn't know about it either. And it stayed on there for months until it was finally detected. And it got into the Department of Defense, critical infrastructure companies, thousands of companies all at the exact same time, created command and control beacons and stuff like that. So that was a new way for a threat actor to actually try to open up new avenues to get a footprint into companies. So who's responsible for a lot of these attacks? One of the main attackers is an organization called Volt Typhoon. It's nation state sponsored by the People's Republic of China. They've been heavily targeting critical infrastructure since 2023 and 2024, but they have worked even before that. Their primary targets are critical infrastructure, trying to get into those OT environments. So who is Volt Typhoon? Volt Typhoon, otherwise known as Vanguard Panda, Bronze Silhouette, Dev 3091, UNC 3236, VoltSite, or Insidious Taurus. Basically, whatever the researcher is or whatever the organization is that's tracking them down, they give them their own name, but the federal government and CISA basically call them Volt Typhoon, and so that's what they're most well known by. Their primary targets are communication and energy, transportation systems, water, and wastewater systems, mainly critical infrastructure. Those are all critical infrastructure organizations. And they're very sophisticated, and they've demonstrated very long-term persistence. On one organization, they were shown to be in their organization for up to 5 years, which is very detrimental, because that gives them essentially a whole lay of the land of that organization and has complete control. They use TTPs, tools, tactics, and procedures, called living off the land. So they're not dropping malware onto systems. They're basically exploiting vulnerabilities within systems. So if they get into your network and you think that you're good, you don't have to patch something because it's behind a firewall. If the threat actor, if Volt Typhoon is behind that firewall as well, they're going to exploit that system. And they're also going to abuse known good Windows protocols and files. So things like run DLL32 or even PowerShell, they're just going to use whatever's native on the box, abuse it, turn it into a web shell or a command and control beacon, anything like that. How do they get into these companies? Open source intelligence, scanning, Shodan, and Census. So they're going to start out with Google search. They're just going to look for what's out there on the internet and then try to exploit what they find. Shodan and Census are internet scanners. They're scanning the entire internet looking for PLCs that are connected to the internet, which shouldn't be. They're also going to show you versions of software that may be vulnerable. So if you go to Shodan and you type in like my company's name, ladwp.com, it'll tell you which version of Apache we're running, the certificates that we're using, things like that. So it actually provides a lot of information without having to do anything even outwardly malicious from the beginning. Initial access, usually through publicly exposed systems that they find on something like Shodan, and then they're going to exploit a vulnerability that is on that system. This could be a known vulnerability, a CVE that hasn't been patched, or it could be a 0-day. It could be a flaw in a program that the vendor doesn't know about, that the customer doesn't know about, but they know about it because they've already reverse engineered it. So then they use that 0-day to get into that system. Once they're into that system, they're moving laterally onto other systems and trying to get deeper into the network. So like I said earlier, the execution of this is manipulation of system files for malicious purposes. These are the good files that are on Windows systems, but used maliciously. Run DLL32 is one of the most common ones. Persistence. What they're going to do is once they get onto these systems, they're going to basically try to steal valid credentials. They're going to get local admin on the box. They're going to try to get domain admin, global admin. They're going to scan your Active Directory. They're going to try to get as much information as they can to then move laterally. And if they're using RDP, then it doesn't really matter. They're not having to do anything malicious. They're just RDPing between boxes, and that doesn't show up on any kind of alert because it's normal. And then defense evasion, very low and very slow. If they're in a company for up to 5 years and they're not getting detected, they're very patient. They're going to do stuff, but they're not going to create a lot of noise. So you have to look for very, very anomalous things that, show up and it kind of makes you say, I don't know if that was supposed to do that or not, but we might want to look into it. So, it's not going to be noisy. They're not going to scan your entire network for vulnerabilities and things like that, because that will end up creating a problem for them, and they're going to get detected. So what's going to happen in the future with cybersecurity, especially against critical infrastructure and OT environments? So there's an increased threat against critical infrastructure. In the Los Angeles area alone, in the next 3 years, there's going to be some major events, including the Olympics. Well, a threat actor is going to want to get in, and if they want to disrupt something like the Olympics, it's going to be critical infrastructure that's going to get attacked. Because if they can disrupt transportation, they can disrupt power, then they can actually shut down massive games like that. AI is increasing the ease of attack. AI is being utilized by threat actors to create malware. It's being utilized to create phishing documents. Basically, they're able to now use AI to create all of these things and make their job easier, which makes our job harder from the blue side. Convergence of OT and IT increases the attack surface. As more things become automated, as more HMIs and PLCs and sensors get connected to each other and you're not using a manual process to turn things on and off, that is actually causing a bigger attack surface that now from the defender standpoint, we need to know about and we need to be able to defend. There's the intensification of ransomware targeting and multifaceted extortion. What's this mean? So ransomware is not slowing down. It's continuing to speed up. It's getting worse. And now what the threat actors are doing, because people aren't paying the ransom to decrypt because they've improved their backups, is now they're stealing your data and then wanting to charge you to try to get your data back, or so they don't sell it on the dark web. So not only do they encrypt your data, but now they also steal it, and then they want you to pay twice, essentially. So threat actors are coming up with any kind of creative means to try to make money because it's a multi-billion-dollar business for them. The interconnection of devices adds complexity. From the power side, we have now smart meters. Almost everyone's house has a smart meter on it. The smart meter is talking out to a mesh network, and then it's talking back to the company, and it's creating more connections. So if you have a company that has smart meters, you're going to have a couple million sensors now, or devices that are on a network that you now need to protect and think about as another attack avenue. So as more and more things get connected and as more people get more data, that's also creating complexity that from a defender standpoint, we need to know about. Supply chain risks. Like I said earlier with SolarWinds, supply chain is a huge, huge risk. And it's not only coming in from an attack surface like a SolarWinds attack, but also on the physical device. So as you're buying stuff, you need to know where you're buying it from, who the manufacturer is. And there's reasons like companies like Huawei are no longer allowed to be sold in the United States because they have direct connections to People's Republic of China and the military, and it poses a big risk. So you need to understand what you're buying, where you're buying it. And as I've learned over the years, it's actually kind of important to read those terms and conditions when you're buying something because it tells you a lot about the company. Typically, it's legal's job to read those terms and conditions, but it's good to know also because you can pick up some interesting things that's in that document. And then insider threats and nation states. So nation states are now utilizing insider threats or insiders to get the information that they want. They're going to implant someone into a company that then feeds them information back. So it's becoming a larger role, especially in cybersecurity, is to become an insider threat hunter, essentially. You're looking for that insider that is potentially downloading information that they shouldn't have access to, or they're downloading information to a flash drive and then taking it off site, things like that. So that's another avenue to think about when you're thinking about careers. The insider threat hunter is going to be a more common one as we go down the road. So what's the OT cyber threat landscape look like for 2025 and beyond? Well, in 2024, there was a 146% increase in sites that impacted by cyber attacks with a physical consequence. That means that something physical happened because of the cyber attack. So there's a huge increase between 23 and 24. Nation state attacks with physical consequences increased 3x from 2023. And the transportation industry was the single biggest vertical impacted by OT attacks with physical consequences in 2024. It accounted for 37% of all the attacks. So think about things like planes, trains, and automobiles. During the Paris Olympics just last year, there was actually physical and cyber attacks against their train systems that caused the trains to stop running. So this is something that we need to think about when the Olympics come to LA in 28. Discrete manufacturing and transportation industries continue to dominate the OT attacks with physical consequences. So as you guys are looking for jobs, you may be working for a manufacturing facility or a transportation department. They're going to have OT environments. It's going to be your job to try to protect that and understand it. And then ICS and OT designed malware are increasingly becoming discovered in the wild. So like I said earlier with the previous attacks, you have things like Stuxnet, right? Those are malware that are specifically designed to attack OT systems. It's not your typical malware that's spray and pray. You're going to try to get onto a Windows box to create a backdoor. This is something that's designed specific for that environment, that software, and whatever that's running. So it's highly sophisticated. How do we defend against this? So you need to have an integrated SOC or a way to have monitoring 24/7. It's my personal opinion that I think you need to have the eyes on glass so that you know what's happening in your environment. And so an integrated SOC is a SOC that monitors your IT environment and your OT environment. It could be two different panes of glass, two different screens, two different systems, but you need to have the understanding of what's happening in each environment. Utilize that defense in depth strategy. Think back to the OT Purdue model. So you have the different layers and the different layers of defense in each layer. Your EDRs in the IT world, multiple firewalls, access controls, know what's happening in each level, and then how to defend against it. And then, like I said earlier, you got to install what you can where you can. So you can't run the advanced stuff in the OT environment. You need to be able to run what you can in that OT environment. Know your inventory, have assets and software. Know what your assets are, know what your software is. OT environments are actually easier to understand in terms of assets and software because it's a much smaller environment. When you get into the IT world, it's just, it's blown up because there's just software and assets everywhere. So, but it's really important to understand what's out there. Protect your important data. Have external backups that are disconnected from your computer. It's called immutable storage. So basically what you do is you back up your servers, you back up your data, and then you disconnect it from the network so that it is protected and can't get encrypted. Patch your operating system. Make sure everything is patched if you can patch it. Like I said earlier, though, some of the HMIs, you can't update those operating systems. So protect what you can with that. And then same with the antivirus. Run whatever you can, wherever you can. Having a good incident response plan. Basically, know what you're going to do when you do get attacked. Companies are going to get attacked. You need to be able to respond accordingly. And then having a well-trained staff and a training plan. So if you're going to be running your own SOC that's monitoring IT and OT, have staff that knows the difference between the two different environments, protocols, networks, things like that. And then once again, that's going to feed into the incident response plan so they know how to respond when something does happen. And then have increased collaboration and sharing of intel. So make sure that you're talking to the federal government, the FBI, CISA, because they're going to be really helpful if things do happen. And then talk to other utilities or other organizations that are in a similar vertical as you so that you can learn from their lessons or they can learn from your lessons. And with that, that's all I have for today. I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for having me back. This is a great experience. And is there any questions? Kenneth. Mostly about development. So if you have like a company like Siemens that's running a PLC or developing a PLC, that PLC has to talk to the sensors. And so they don't have the same kind of development life cycle. And they're looking at more like 5, 10, 15-year cycles for that equipment, as opposed to something like your Windows operating system, which is getting updated monthly. So it's about uptime and making sure that things work as opposed to continually improving and developing. I mean, yeah, we're getting scanned all the time. I mean, there are nation states and organizations that are out there that are scanning continually. We get phishing attacks on a regular basis. Whether it's a Russian threat actor that's trying to deploy ransomware, or if it's a nation state like China. I mean, we see those scans and we see the the alerts that are coming in from that. We've actually done a pretty good job of automating a lot of the defense capabilities. So like when we see typical scans that are starting to come in, we'll automatically add those to our firewall block list. And so it really kind of prevents them from trying to even get that initial scanning and recon that's happening. Yeah. And we've been running our SIM that we currently have for about 10 years now. And so we've gotten really good at fine tuning it so that we know what we're looking for. And when things do happen, we can respond quickly. Like, you know, if a phishing email does get through and a user clicks on a link that's malicious, we have a lot of tools in place to pick that up and then try to, you know, we'll isolate systems real quick. We've gotten to the point where when a user clicks on something and there's potentially malware on it, we isolate before we ask questions. So we'll isolate it first, and then we'll start digging into like, hey, what happened? Just to be on the safe side, because threat actors using things like AI have automated the attack process where as soon as they get onto a box, they're going to try to dump credentials and move laterally to get off that box. So taking a very proactive approach is the best way to do that. Either way. In a perfect world, yes. In reality, I don't see that happening very often because then as you look at things like PLCs as well, on the power side of the house, in order to upgrade a PLC, you have to cause an outage because a lot of times the PLCs aren't even built with redundancy. So you can't take one down and have that PLC fall over to a secondary. So as you take a PLC down, you might be causing a power outage for a small regional area. And so that could be potentially bad. So there's a lot of layered challenges when it comes to these PLCs. So even if they did have a frequent update cycle, the people that are operating those PLCs aren't going to be updating them because of the physical consequences of that, the power outages, or you know if they have to shut off water for a neighborhood or something like that, people aren't going to be very happy about that. So it's a big challenging process, and I don't know if there's a silver bullet for that solution. Yeah, absolutely. So on the power side, we have NERC SIP, which is the federal regulations that are specific to power and energy. On the water side, there's not a lot of federal regulations yet, but the EPA is starting to have a bigger role in terms of protecting the water system. And then for power with NERC SIP, it's actually a very detailed plan in terms of you do basically like annual cyber vulnerability analysis. You're scanning the systems. For the systems that can't get updated, you're documenting what those systems are. And basically like you're saying, we know we have the system, we know it can't be updated, we know we can't patch it, but it needs to run because it's doing this thing over here. So it's a kind of a risk analysis and risk acceptance for that. Question back here? Yeah. That's a great question because that's the trying to catch the threat actor before they get in there. If you can have control over that like engineering workstation or the contracted workstation as they brought that device into the network, making sure that it doesn't have any software on there that it shouldn't have. So understanding what's on those devices as they connect in, that's I think one of the biggest mitigating factors. And then, but I mean, it's a valid question because if on the HMI, if it's saying everything's good, you know, it's hard to detect. So I think having logs, having access logs, understanding if there is something anomalous happening in the situation of the Stuxnet. I think they had a typical burn rate, like a small burn rate of these centrifuges, and they were expecting to have to replace a certain number. But when that number became much bigger, and they still didn't understand it, they continued to go down the same path and just like, okay, well, we're just going to plow through this and then replace these centrifuges, and then eventually they didn't have enough centrifuges to replace them. And so I think you have to look for different anomalies. And so if you have devices that are now starting to break on a more frequent basis, think about it not in terms of like a physical thing, but maybe it is an electronic cyber. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.